The Bible describes a global flood about 1,600 years after creation.
This week on Creation Magazine Live, the consequences of a global flood.
Oh my! Oh, hooray!
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name's Calvin Smith.
And I'm Richard Fangrad.
And our topic this week is evidence that supports a global flood. What are some of the lasting results that we could investigate today that are the consequences of a global flood around 2500 BC, as the Bible records?
Wow! The interesting thing about that is...
Well, we can start by asking, what would a global flood do? Firstly, it would cause massive erosion of the existing land surface and deposition of the eroded sediment. And it would do that on a global scale, since it's a global flood.
Global flood, right, yeah.
So a global flood would impact our understanding of geology, the study of rock formations.
Geology is centered on the concept of uniformitarianism. That is the idea that the present is the key to the past, or that rocks today behave the same way they did in the past. This concept also applies to depositional environments, including floods. A flood today would behave the same as a flood in the past. Modern floods affect the environment the same as ancient floods. Geologists can tell when an area was flooded because floods leave distinct markers. CMI wants to argue this rule does not apply to Noah's flood. Let's see how well that goes for them.
Secondly, it would bury plants and animals on a global scale. That would affect our understanding of the fossil record, which is paleontology.
Again, the implication is that Noah's flood is somehow unique in its mechanisms, that the way it created fossils is somehow different.
And thirdly, it would restart human history, so it would affect our understanding of ancient history and the origin of nations.
Right.
It would affect other things as well. We're just going to focus on these three areas over the next half hour.
Okay, so said another way, denying a global flood will lead to misinterpretations of data in geology, paleontology, and ancient history.
I don't believe you.
Right. If you don't take a global flood into account, you likely won't get correct conclusions in these areas, and we'll show you how that works. And let's break this down a little bit further.
Don't smother you kids.
What would we expect to find in these three areas if there was a global flood? In geology, we would expect to find sedimentary rock showing evidence of rapid deposition. We'd also expect to find large-scale geologic features, continent-wide geologic features.
Of course, CMI does not explain why this exhaustive list is to be expected. It is presented as a common sense evidence of Noah's flood.
In paleontology, we would expect to find fossils showing evidence of rapid and recent burial involving evidence that they were buried alive.
How the fuck does CMI think fossils form on a 4.6 billion year old Earth? Slowly? These guys sure seem to love the smell of their own farts.
Right.
We'd expect to find a general pattern to the fossil record matching different ecological areas with exceptions.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
A global flood would mix many things together, but there'd be a certain amount of sorting going on. So we would expect a general pattern, but we should also find exceptions to that pattern because the flood was, after all, a catastrophic event.
It was, right.
So, even if CMI are wrong, they are still right because Bible.
And I'm his friend Jesus.
In ancient history, we would expect to find evidence that human population and ancient nations began about 4,500 years ago. So let's go back to the top of the list. In geology, do we see evidence that sedimentary rock was deposited rapidly?
No. No. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No. 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 Hell no. 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 I refuse. No.
Absolutely. Here's a picture. Have a look at this. I took this when I was rafting through the Grand Canyon. Notice the tightly bent layers of rock. These layers were deposited horizontally, and then some uplift occurred, tilting the strata on the right side of the picture there, nearly vertical. These layers, the entire thickness that you're seeing here, must have been deposited rapidly. Then, not long afterwards, the uplift occurred, which bent the still soft layers. It didn't break them, it just bent them. If the sediments had been laid down over eons of time, they would have lithified. They would have hardened into solid rock. And the rock would be broken, not bent. This is evidence for rapid deposition.
Right.
A few issues to tackle here. First, soft sediments wouldn't fold, they would squish together. Go play in the mud for a few minutes and tell me how well those layers keep their shape. Second, his very example includes stratigraphic layers. These layers would have to cement individually, otherwise they'd all be the same layer. This implies separate deposition as well. I'm interested in hearing how Noah's flood would stop and start depositing over its 7-year history. Third, does this quick folding process apply to all folded strata? Are you arguing folds and metamorphic rocks happened before they solidified as well?
And here's a fossilized tree-like plant extending through multiple layers of rock. Obviously, the entire thing must have been buried rapidly. If it was buried over millions of years, the top of the tree would have rotted.
Right.
It wouldn't have been fossilized. Here's another picture of a fossilized tree extending through multiple layers of rock with the base of the tree in a coal seam. This is from Tennessee. This is evidence that the tree, the material that has since turned to coal, and the sediment that encased the rest of the tree were all deposited before the tree rotted. If there was a global flood, this is exactly the kind of thing that we would expect to find.
Right, and that's what we find.
Since Noah's flood is global, shouldn't we find trees like this everywhere? If the majority of the Earth's sediments were deposited at the same time, wouldn't most of the trees be buried like these examples?
Or a global flood. In geology, we just talked about this, we would expect to find large-scale geologic features, and that's exactly what we find. If we go back to Grand Canyon, here you can see a cross-section of the layers of rock. The canyon is on the right side there. Some of the layers exposed there at Grand Canyon can be traced to England. Incredible.
Yeah.
So this is sediment deposited on a massive scale. Again, some of the one of the very lowest layers, the Tapete sandstone, can be traced to England. What kind of a process lays that down?
Exactly.
Well, a global flood.
A global process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The Tapete sandstone is Cambrian in origin. Notice on this Cambrian globe how North America and Scotland are connected. That is how the Tapete sandstone can be formed in Arizona and England. If Noah's flood deposited the Tapete sandstone globally, wouldn't the Tapete sandstone be everywhere, not concentrated in the southern US and England?
Another observation at Grand Canyon is that there's been a huge amount of erosion near the canyon. There's a butte called Red Butte. It's about 1,000 feet tall, and it preserves some of the layers that used to exist above Grand Canyon and have been eroded. So here are some large-scale geologic features, huge deposition of sediments, widespread erosion that would be expected to be found if the flood had happened.
Right, yeah.
CMI's evidence of
There's continent-wide geologic features.
is a 2,000-meter tall butte. And obviously there's erosion at the Grand Canyon. The fucking Colorado River runs through it.
For 6 million years.
A common question often associated with the flood is, where did the water come from? You've got a global flood, where did the water come from?
Yeah.
It's a very popular question. We get that all the time in question times.
Yep.
Some of you will know the name Jacques Cousteau. He said that if you were to raise the ocean bottoms so that they're even with the continents, there's enough water in the oceans right now to flood the entire Earth to a depth of more than 2 miles. So where'd the water come from?
Still here.
The oceans, and still here, yeah. Yeah.
And that's exactly what scientists believe was going on during the flood. Rapid plate tectonics during the flood is a powerful scientific model developed by the world's leading geophysicist on plate tectonic modeling.
Yep.
We did an episode focusing on this model. You can watch it online at creation.com/CML2-07. So that's Creation Magazine Live, Season 2, Episode 7.
Yeah. That model suggests not only that the continents moved horizontally, so the original supercontinent broke up, but that the ocean floor was actually raised, that there was vertical movement, and that answers the question about where the water came from. The ocean bottoms came up, the water that's in the oceans covered the land.
Of course, 2 miles of water wouldn't cover Everest, for example.
Right.
Everest is about 5.5 miles above sea level. However, Everest is the result of a collision of the Indian plate smashing into the Asian plate, right?
Right.
Towards the edge of the flood, and it didn't exist before the flood, so those massive upthrusts would have been...
Everest.
Yeah.
There's fish fossils on the top of Mount Everest.
Right.
And how did they get there? Fish don't climb mountains and
Exactly.
stuff. But plate tectonics, that model is that itself has great explanatory power for large-scale geologic features like the Himalayan mountain range.